At 12:30 in the morning on a Saturday in May 2026, a woman named Yananisha Thomas was asleep at her home in Central Florida when her phone lit up with an email. She had worked for Spirit Airlines for 4 years. She knew the company was struggling. Everyone did. But nothing quite prepares you for reading those words in the dark at midnight. Basically, she said, it just felt like a breakup. It felt like being in a relationship and finding out your partner had been cheating on you and realizing you were the only one who didn't know. By the time the sun came up that Saturday morning, Spirit Airlines was gone. 9,000 flights canceled. Overnight, 0.8 million summer travelers stranded or scrambling. Thousands of employees with no job, no warning, and no real explanation beyond an email sent while they slept. Passengers were filmed in airport terminals. Some crying, some furious. Most just standing in lines that weren't moving, being told their flights would not take place because the airline would not exist tomorrow. 34 years, 200 planes at its peak, 17,000 employees, fares as low as $39. And it ended with a midnight email and a line of confused passengers in Orlando who had nowhere to go. But here's the thing. Spirit Airlines didn't just fail. It was failed by competitors who gamed the system, by a federal government that blocked its only lifeline, by a presidential bailout that was dangled and then disappeared, and by an industry that quietly needed Spirit to die so it could start charging everyone more. This is that story, and by the end of it, you're going to look at your next plane ticket very differently. To understand what Spirit Airlines became, you first have to understand what it was never supposed to be. It started in 1964, not as an airline at all, but as a trucking company in Michigan, moving car parts from factory to factory. For almost 2 decades, that's all it was. Then in 1983, a man named Ned Homfeld looked at the company's assets and made a decision nobody saw coming. He launched a passenger airline out of Detroit and called it Charter One. No grand vision. No disruption strategy. The earliest routes were gambling trips, buses with wings, essentially, shuttling people to the casinos in Atlantic City, then later down to Florida and Vegas. By 1992, it finally had a proper name, Spirit Airlines. 4 planes, a small but growing appetite for getting people somewhere cheap. And here's what most people don't know about the early years. Spirit wasn't trying to revolutionize anything. It was just trying to survive. But survival in the airline industry requires a competitive edge. And Spirit found its edge not in service, not in comfort, not in prestige, but in the one thing every other airline was afraid to compete on: price. You have to understand what flying looked like before the ultra-low-cost carriers arrived. Southwest had cracked open the market in the 1970s, proved that ordinary people could fly if the price was right. But even Southwest had limits. Spirit looked at what Southwest was doing and pushed it further than anyone thought was commercially viable. In 2004, Spirit adopted what the industry calls an ultra-low-cost model. And the concept was almost brutally simple. You get a personal item and an unassigned seat. That's it. Everything else costs extra. Carry-on bag, extra. Checked bag, extra. Snacks, extra. Leg room, extra. Printing your boarding pass at the airport, extra. Even water, in some cases extra. Most travelers hated this, which is exactly what Spirit was counting on. Because the people who hated it weren't Spirit's customers anyway. Spirit's customers were the ones who looked at a $39 fare to Florida and didn't ask a single question about what came with it. Then, in 2006, a CEO named Ben Baldanza took the wheel, and he did not pump the brakes. He made the seats thinner to pack more passengers on each flight. He leaned into the stripped-down branding so hard it became its own kind of identity. And he greenlit advertising campaigns so deliberately provocative that they became news events in themselves. After the Deepwater Horizon oil spill in 2010, Spirit ran an ad riffing on the disaster. They ran campaigns with sexual innuendo. They ran ads designed to offend exactly the kind of travelers they didn't want. Because offending the wrong customer is still free marketing. These ads worked not because they were tasteful, they were unforgettable. And they spoke directly to Spirit's actual audience: spring breakers, budget travelers, working-class families who wanted to get somewhere and back without spending their monthly grocery budget. By the mid-2010s, Spirit Airlines had 200 planes and a market valuation of $6 billion. It had one of the best safety records in the industry, not a single fatal crash in its entire history. At one point, it was ranked second in the country for on-time arrivals, and it had done something that even Delta and American couldn't ignore anymore. It had made the biggest airlines in America afraid. Because what Spirit created, without really intending to, was something aviation economists started calling the Spirit effect. When Spirit entered a new route, fares on that route dropped. Not just Spirit's fares, everyone's fares. Delta, American, United. All of them had to respond to Spirit's prices or risk losing passengers to a carrier charging a fraction of what they charged. Spirit was flying 200 planes, but its pricing influence touched thousands of routes it never flew a single seat on. In the 2010s, Delta and American quietly did something that tells you everything you need to know. They created basic economy fares. Stripped down, no-frills tickets at the bottom of their pricing structure. Airlines that had spent decades selling comfort and prestige started racing Spirit to the bottom because the alternative was losing. But here's the thing about building an identity on being the cheapest option available. That identity is fragile. And what happened next, nobody at Spirit's headquarters saw coming. The pandemic changed everything about air travel. But for Spirit, it changed something specific. Something the company never fully recovered from. When travel came back after COVID, it came back differently. The post-pandemic traveler with disposable income wasn't looking for the cheapest seat anymore. They'd spent 2 years at home. They wanted the window seat with the extra legroom. They wanted the lounge access. They wanted the lie-flat bed on the overnight flight to Europe. They wanted, in short, the opposite of everything Spirit had ever sold. Business travelers came back and went straight to first class. Premium economy sold out. International long-haul routes, with their $1,000 business class seats that make up the majority of a flight's revenue, were booming. Delta rolled out new business class cabins with doors. United invested billions in premium products. American followed. The money in aviation had shifted dramatically toward exactly the kind of product Spirit had no way to offer. Spirit tried to adapt. It genuinely did. It added extra legroom options. It refreshed what it called the big front seat, its version of a first-class cabin. It started bundling fares to make the add-on process less confusing. It tried to soften the brand's rough edges. But you cannot be a budget airline and a premium airline at the same time. You cannot spend 20 years telling customers that every comfort costs extra, and then ask those same customers to trust you with their upgrade. One aviation analyst put it perfectly. Spirit was a Waffle House trying to become a Michelin star restaurant. The kitchen was the same. The reputation was the same. And the customers who wanted Michelin already knew where to go. Meanwhile, the economic environment was turning hostile. Inflation hit. Domestic travel slowed. The price-sensitive customers, who had always been Spirit's core, The ones booking $39 fares to Florida were tightening their budgets, and the wealthier travelers shifting toward international routes were flying Delta and United across the Atlantic, spending thousands per seat on routes. Spirit simply didn't fly. In 4 years, Spirit Airlines lost $2.5 billion. And this is the part of the story most people glossed over. Because in 2022, Spirit Airlines had a way out, a genuine lifeline. A deal that, had it gone through, might have changed everything. JetBlue wanted to buy Spirit, a $3.8 billion acquisition. On paper, it made sense. JetBlue would inherit Spirit's routes, its fleet, its cost structure. Spirit shareholders would get paid out. The employees would have a larger, more stable airline behind them. The deal was announced. The paperwork moved forward, and then a federal judge stepped in. In 2024, the Department of Justice argued that allowing JetBlue to absorb Spirit would reduce competition, that consumers would end up with fewer options and higher fares. The judge agreed. The merger was blocked on antitrust grounds. Here's the brutal irony of that decision. The ruling was designed to protect consumers from higher fares. But by blocking the only deal that could have kept Spirit alive, it guaranteed that Spirit's 9,000 routes would eventually disappear entirely. And when those routes disappeared, fares on every single one of them went up anyway. The medicine killed the patient and left everyone else sicker in the process. With the JetBlue deal dead, Spirit was on its own, and the numbers were catastrophic. In November 2024, Spirit filed for bankruptcy for the first time. It restructured its debt, came out with a cleaner balance sheet, and tried to stabilize. But almost immediately, jet fuel prices spiked, driven in part by rising tensions in the Middle East. Aircraft lease costs climbed. Demand on Spirit's domestic routes kept softening. The company was trying to bail out a flooding boat with a paper cup. By August 2025, Spirit filed for bankruptcy again. $8 billion in debt, routes slashed, planes sold off, staff cut to the bone. The airline that had once carried 47 million passengers a year was flying 500,000 fewer travelers in a single month compared to the year before. And then, in what might be the strangest chapter in American aviation history, the President of the United States got involved. In the final months before Spirit's collapse, the company entered talks with the Trump administration about a $500 million government bailout. The proposal was unusual, to put it charitably. Trump publicly floated the idea of the federal government purchasing Spirit Airlines outright, using its planes to transport military personnel and cargo. He said on camera, "We're thinking about doing it, helping them out. I think we just buy it." For a moment, just a moment, it seemed like it happened. A sitting president publicly endorsing the government acquisition of a bankrupt airline. The talks were real. The proposal was real. And for Spirit's 9,000 employees, it was the last flicker of something that looked like hope. Then the funding fell through. The talks stalled. Nobody could find the money, and that was that. On May 2nd, 2026, Spirit Airlines closed completely. No grace period, no transition. Flights canceled overnight. Passengers stranded in terminals across the country, standing in lines to be told that their rebooked flights would also not take place, because the company would not exist tomorrow. Yananisha Thomas got her email at 12:30 in the morning. By sunrise, she was trying to figure out how to rebuild a career she'd spent 4 years building. She said it felt like her home had burnt down. That's not a metaphor. That's the lived reality of thousands of Spirit employees who now face starting completely over. In an industry where seniority matters enormously, where training programs at new airlines can run 4 weeks and go unpaid, where you have to learn entire new aircraft from scratch before you can earn a single dollar. Starting over isn't inconvenient. It's devastating. And it wasn't just the employees. Spirit Airlines wasn't just an airline in many parts of Florida. It was infrastructure. Entire towns where Spirit operated as the primary carrier. Communities built around the jobs the airline created. Ground crews, airport service workers, local vendors, hotels, near terminals. When Spirit left those towns, it didn't just remove a flight option. It removed an economic engine. And for the passengers, the ones Spirit was actually built for, the numbers are already telling the story. An aviation reporter analyzed what happened on routes after Spirit stopped flying them. On average, fares on those routes rose 14%. 14%, just from Spirit pulling out of a single route. Now imagine what happens when Spirit's entire network is gone. Every route, every city, every market where Spirit's presence kept prices honest. You don't have to have ever flown Spirit to feel this. You don't have to have ever set foot on one of their thin seats or paid $8 for a cup of water. Spirit's existence, the simple fact of it being there, was keeping your ticket cheaper. And now it isn't there anymore. In the days after the collapse, something genuinely unexpected happened on TikTok. A video went viral, someone proposing that regular people crowdfund a purchase of Spirit Airlines. Keep it alive. Keep fares low. The pledges poured in. Within days, the movement had topped $130 million in commitments. Spirit's own union backed it publicly. It was a beautiful idea, and almost certainly an impossible one. $8 billion in debt, fuel costs spiraling, regulatory requirements that take years and billions to navigate. Running an airline is not a crowdfunding project, but the fact that so many people tried, that says something important about how much Spirit meant to the people it served. So what comes next? For the industry, for budget travel, for the millions of Americans who flew Spirit because Spirit was what they could afford. Frontier and Allegiant are still out there. Breeze and Avelo have carved out small niches. JetBlue is advertising $99 fares to Florida, partly to capture Spirit's abandoned market. Frontier's stock actually rose in the hours after Spirit's closure announcement. The budget segment isn't dead, but it is smaller, and it is weaker. And without Spirit, the largest, the most aggressive, the one that made Delta and American genuinely nervous, the pressure that kept budget fares honest across the whole industry is gone. The major legacy carriers are not mourning Spirit. They are investing billions in premium cabins with closing doors, lie-flat seats, and lounge expansions. They are chasing the wealthy frailer who isn't affected by economic downturns, who books business class regardless of what fuel costs, who will spend whatever it takes to fly comfortably. That customer is extraordinarily profitable, and that customer was never Spirit's customer. There is a version of this story where Spirit made fatal mistakes, where the ultra-cheap model was always going to hit a wall, where the failure to build premium products, the inability to capture business travelers, the debt spiral, where all of it was inevitable. And maybe some of that is true. But there is another version of this story, one that is harder to sit with. Spirit Airlines existed to make flying possible for people who couldn't afford to fly any other way. The single mother booking a $39 fare to see her family in Florida. The young couple taking their first vacation, who had exactly one budget option. The communities in small cities that had Spirit service and would have had nothing without it. These were Spirit's people. And Spirit, for all its thin seats and bag fees and midnight emails, showed up for them for 34 years. The government blocked the one deal that could have saved it, in the name of protecting consumers. The bailout, that might have preserved it never found its funding, and the industry that feared Spirit most is now free to charge whatever it wants on the routes Spirit used to fly. When Spirit's last plane landed, more than just an airline ended. The pressure valve that kept American air travel accessible to ordinary people was removed. And what fills that space? Higher fares, fewer options, premium products for premium customers, is already arriving at an airport near you. The question worth asking, the one nobody in a government hearing room or airline boardroom seems particularly eager to answer, is a simple one. When flying gets more expensive, and it will, who gets left behind? Spirit Airlines knew the answer to that, why it existed. And now that it's gone, so does everyone who needed it most.